Welcome to my channel, The Magic of Java. This is an extract from my second book, The Magic Sugar from Java. It's a novel. It reflects my experience of falling in love with Indonesia and falling in love with an Indonesian lady and slowly recognising that she has been taken from me either through black magic or simple criminality. Or is it simply my descent into madness? Whatever, it's still a novel. Any resemblance to real people is unintentional. But of course it's based on my experience. And yes, it's based on people I know. But amalgamations or caricatures of them. I do mention real celebrities and hope they will forgive me, along with any of my family and friends who believe that they have identified themselves. A happy family destroyed. For the first time, my night bus left on time and arrived before 3 in the morning. I had had little sleep, maybe because the only seat was at the back, which was very bumpy as the bus raced along the rural roads, or maybe because it was Monday night, Tuesday to Indonesians. Nevertheless, I decided to walk home rather than argue with the unscrupulous taxi drivers who pick up disoriented travellers as they arrive from the night bus. I was later to find that Maddie's younger sister, when visiting us, was charged by 1,000% by a driver from Lebak Bulus, and Maddie's younger sister is the poorest person I know. It was a long walk, preposterous to an Indonesian, but a lovely night and no traffic at that earlier hour. I arrived home in South Jakarta to find it remarkably clean, although a little untidy, with around 2 weeks of ironing piled on every surface, like a student house that had hurriedly been cleaned prior to a parent's arrival. I quickly showered and grabbed a fossilised claw that Pa Anggabaya had given to me, and which I had placed on my pillow. But it wasn't a claw, more like the fossil of a human or an orangutan's toe. Maddie believed it to be a major source of his power over the house. I made my way to the Mashola, tossing the toe into the stream on my way, but the Mashola was in darkness, so I returned home to pray, only to hear the Adhan much later. Had I been praying much too early in Gunung Kidul? Maybe, but more likely it's simply because Gunung Kidul is further east. After praying at home, I resolved not to go near the Mashola again, and to either go to the Muhammadiyah Masjid or pray at home. Later that day, I cleared the house of all the other jimat and wafak Pa Anggabaya had given to us. Like spells and spirits, I believe that only a few work as promised, but the few that do can cause enormous harm. So the majority of spells and spirits sent to us and objects within our house have no effect whatsoever. But how could we know which were inert and which were active? When Widati finally woke up, she said that Buddy had called again, asking her to tell me that Maddie was ill and I needed to return. Not again. I called Maddie, and yes, it had been a bad night, hence my inability to sleep, but she was now fine and realised that I had much to sort out in Jakarta. After all, it was some 7 weeks since we had fled, and 4 months since Maddie had been at our home in South Jakarta. A few days later, Maddie had her Ruqyah, and once again many spirits were removed from her, this time claiming to be sent by Muni. So he is not dead, as Putri had said. Maybe it's just a metaphor, or possibly a matter of time before Putri's revelations actually occur. Or are they as ridiculous as they seem? When I first arrived in Gunung Kidul with a crazed Maddie, I overheard Mas Predictor calling, who I believed to be Pa Erte. Muni clearly believes he is winning and focuses his attention on killing Maddie off. Although, as I understand, he has asked Widati where her university was, maybe is about to shift focus. As Maddie seems even worse every time she goes to the Pasar in Odessa. Is this attributable to uni, or more likely, like the Chinese gold exchanges in Jakarta's Block M, traders are simply using spirits to protect their business interests? Not something I considered most likely at the time, though. I'm beginning to realise just how frightened uni and piety are of us. Partially they are aware of my important connections and just how easily I could end all of this forever. But the first day back in South Jakarta and on the internet for the first time in months, I uncovered a number of issues, such as I was still being debited for electricity in the UK, despite having left 2 years ago. In fact, they took $300 from my bank account and plagued me for meter readings. Some more of my investments were frozen simply because I lived in Indonesia and would only be released on an original signature from me. Is there more to this problem than I am being told, or is this simply my paranoia? When at grammar school in the UK, we had a 2-week timetable, so impossible to memorise. I had recurrent dreams that I would lose this timetable and end up going to all the wrong lessons, only to be punished each time I arrived late for my actual lesson. When I recounted this nightmare to my son in front of my former partner, she used this information to ridicule me in front of my son, when I was simply trying to help him cope with his 10-day timetable. This dream now appears to be coming true, simply because I dared to leave the UK when nobody has considered such a situation in re-engineering their business processes. Or could there be a more sinister reason? The overzealous application of anti-money laundering legislation has become the new health and safety or data protection. It is creating impossible hurdles for anyone who moves between countries, especially to those that are cash-based. Whenever I remonstrate about the application of these, I am met with the question, why don't you? For example, I am told there are many places in Indonesia that accept credit cards, including the equivalent of Harrods, Harvey Nichols and the Savoy. But nobody has agreed with me. Why shouldn't I pay cash rather than pay the exorbitant bank charges for moving money between countries and currencies? Indeed, I save $400 each time I carry to Indonesia, and would save considerably more if I carried more cash than regulations permit me to. All of these solutions admit that in Indonesia one is not allowed to have a bank account until you have a residency, so one has to carry cash in order to fund a residency and living until a bank account becomes set up, which takes at least 3 months and in my case 10 years. But it seems to me that utilities, banks and governments have all spotted an opportunity to scam some money out of those who emigrate, knowing that they're powerless to do anything about it. In fact, as I began to investigate my continued payment for electricity I had not used in a country I no longer live in, I can confirm that it is a result of deliberate sharp practice by utility companies in the UK. Like the telephone company, the electricity company have now handed me over to a debt collector, I presume because they are paid more for fraudulent bills by the collection agencies than they would by issuing me with a correct bill, highlighting the wonderful profit maximisation efficiencies which are brought about by privatisation. Of course, in a few years' time, this scandal will be exposed and British people will be plagued with calls from Swansea offering to assist in gaining compensation. But no compensation will make up for the distress it has caused me whilst worried about if my family would live. Indeed, there are such strong parallels now between how our neighbours, family and friends in Indonesia have tormented me based on a belief system which has dehumanised me, and how financial services and utilities companies have exploited me. It seems to me that the privatised companies and oligopolies subscribe to a view of capitalism completely unbounded by ethics and morals, which justifies their inhumanity towards their customers, shrugging it off as that's business. But in a competitive environment, which is the Chicago School's definition of capitalism, this isn't business at all. As if you mistreat your customers, you have no business. So maybe I've been too quick to condemn Indonesia. As in the UK, our cruelty and inhumanity are hidden behind corporate structures, regulators, and commercial law. I also received a completely ridiculous offer for my old office in the UK. So ridiculous it wouldn't buy a home anywhere in Jakarta. But shortly afterwards I received a suitable offer, which I accepted. I sent my son $300, but he's now ignoring me until he decides to harangue me once more. I prayed at the Muhammadiyah Masjid, meeting a number of people who I occasionally saw at the Mashola, who asked why I wasn't there, and I explained that it was evil. Nobody questioned me, and in fact they all seemed to know already. I left for the cost the next morning to find Titi in her pyjamas and not at school. She was evidently depressed about something. The cost had been cleaned remarkably well of Jimat and Wafak from Pahangabaya, and there was no sign of the rings from Pahangabaya and Omuni, the stones of which we believed contained evil spirits. Indonesians believe that precious and semi-precious stones contain souls and jinns. Even that a dukun can place them there to protect or harm the wearer. I set about collecting some clothing Maddie would want and some of mine. Everything was fairly organised and clean. Later I found that Titi's niece was coming to the cost and cleaning it for Titi. A shame she cannot get her to go to school. The cost made me sad, as it embodied Maddie, a woman whom I may have lost forever. Her shorts, G-strings, perfume, etc. How I would swap our troubled times in the cost for the situation we now find ourselves in. In fact, looking back on it, despite our troubles, we were so happy in that little cost. As I sorted through Maddie's G-strings to take some to Gunung Kidul, I had a little cry. She was a woman who only wanted everybody to be happy and did her utmost to make this happen. Maybe when Maddie's story is finally told, there will be tears shed in the boardrooms of international banks and oil companies. Even the odd mafia boss will recall the kind-hearted girl with the lovely smile in Jakarta. I was delighted to be welcomed back to the Mashola at the cost. I really do love this Mashola and the people who attended. All asked how I was, and I explained about Maddie, to their disgust at what our other neighbours were doing. I had made friends with 3 teenage boys who had learning difficulties. They rarely attended school as they were bullied, so they were always around Maddie's cost. You see, as a foreigner who speaks only limited Bahasa, it is often easier to make friends with children and those with learning difficulties than with adults. That is, if an adult hasn't already frightened their children, as when a bully meets an adult with a young child, the child often cries because the adult has told them that the white monster is coming to get them. Such is their fear that as soon as I have passed a group of children and could not catch them, they will shout bully at me, occasionally throw stones, illustrating how the use of the term bully dehumanises all Westerners. I have vague memories about such stories about black men in the UK in the 1960s, and of course guarding your cheese from Welshmen, but such racism is incomprehensible now. Or do adults warn children about Muslims? Although, of course, if the word boogeyman is derived from Bugis, the parallels are more chilling. Years after writing this, Yanni's 1-year-old son became spontaneously frightened of me, so my white skin must be the cause of this reaction. Later, when my father died and I was away for 2 months, Yanni would show her son pictures of me, which he would cuddle and kiss, perfectly illustrating Indonesia's schizophrenic attitudes towards bullies. One of the boys with learning difficulties always wore jogging pants, a petchie and a Manchester United top. He was delighted when I gave him a real Manchester United top from Manchester. This red devil would steal women's underwear from the washing lines. I understand nothing too sinister. He would simply sit in his mother's cost, kissing the newly acquired items. So perhaps Manchester United supporters do the word over. But this was enough to get him shunned by the neighbours. The word in Bahasa for a young man with learning difficulties is laki-laki gila, meaning crazy boy. So when I explained to them that my wife was now gila, they thought it hilarious, maybe even wanting to welcome Maddie to their gang. After all, she had an abundance of wonderful underwear. After prayers, Lima came round with the rings, which we resolved to sell Coco, the generic name for older Chinese men, the gold dealer Maddie had used, which we did for a fraction of what we had paid to Omuni, but we believed them to contain malevolence and needed to be disposed of. Lima explained that Kiki's second wife, he had divorced his adulterous first wife, had embezzled $400,000 from the company she worked for, and in all probability both she and Kiki would go to prison. Thinking about Kiki, there must be an equivalent of FTs, where rich Indonesian men go to find beautiful brides, but Kiki has been very unlucky in those he chose. On reflection, it was probably just Facebook. I have heard about this family liability when in a rage threatening to kill Paerte, but hadn't believed it could be true. Titi was depressed. Kiki had persuaded her to apply to the University of Indonesia and said he would pay her fees. Not that I felt he could be trusted. And now he was going to jail. As a result, Titi was unable to attend school, despite being on a final warning for all the time she had already taken off. I had received so many premonitions about crime, but never considered they were about Kiki. I later found that Widiati was only a little stronger than her sister. Like her sister, she was unwilling to stay in our house in South Jakarta, but fortunately, in her case, this was not immediate. She cried on my shoulder. I really couldn't comprehend why she was crying, but maybe she'd ask, why shouldn't she? So it would seem that a year of torment from my neighbours had brought my family to a complete meltdown, providing me with increasingly limited room for manoeuvre. This is a family which only a year ago was possibly the happiest in the whole world, full of love and without a care. I myself arrived in Indonesia less than 2 years ago, and my life has already been completely destroyed. I am devastated. Yes, I arrived in Indonesia on a dog's chance, having already failed at keeping a family together and bringing up a son, but only a year ago all seemed so perfect. There was so much to do in Jakarta, but Bude and Maddie wanted me back in Gunung Kidul as soon as possible. I called a family meeting in Chez Frank, but Titi made an excuse and Widati wanted to go to university, so I told her it was better to go there. Nevertheless, I went to Chez Frank alone for my last time, and for the first time I was the only bule, as it now attracts middle-class Indonesians. Not many, but they're all eating, so presumably spending some money there. For my part, eating Western food for the first time in 7 weeks was welcome, but now, with not smoking nor drinking beer, and without my captivating wife, there really is no attraction for me. I told all the staff about Maddie, and while shocked and upset, there really was a fatalism to their reaction. However, my chat with Ian, my mentor spirit Frank's son, was so enlightening. He explained that virtually all his Bude customers had left Indonesia, even those with Indonesian families, and had lived here for decades. Few had anything to go back to in Europe, but all felt it better than put up with the increasing hatred and hostility they now experienced in Jakarta. It would seem that with the crackdown on work permits, employers were exploiting the situation by not paying bullets, making promises that the money would come. But as the bullets ran out of money and eventually their work permits were rescinded, all that was left was to leave without their back pay. You see, despite the warm welcome we all receive in Indonesia, we're as welcome as a rabid dog in a masjid. I believe this not only reflects the greater opportunities to defraud visitors and new arrival, but also reflects how one's status diminishes from honoured guest to subhuman, only marginally above drivers and maids. The loss of so many bullets to Indonesia has been somewhat replaced by Chinese and Japanese workers. Nevertheless, Indonesia has experienced a declining number of foreigners working in the country by over half, leaving only around 2,000 Brits, mostly in South Jakarta and southern Bali. Whilst working population is different from residents, there are around 10,000 Indonesian residents in the UK, so Indonesians are much more populous in the UK than Brits are in Indonesia, despite one never meeting Indonesians in the UK. Then only 2 weeks after writing this, a girl from Mali moved into the house next door to my mother's in Shrewsbury, though of course a single personal experience proves nothing, not that would deter Indonesians when arguing their cause. In fact, such facts do not deter Indonesian politicians from stating the exact opposite. Even when presented with these facts, reciprocity is only important to Indonesians when it favours them. In any case, why let the truth ruin a good argument? Suharto's daughter recently resigned from her father's Golkar party to join her brother in a new party, citing the influx of foreign workers and continued food imports. Suharto's daughter intends to stand for Jogja, whereas the son in Papua. Now maybe I'm misreading this, but I can only see it as deliberate provocation designed to create further unrest in Indonesia. But then, what would I know as a foreigner? A probable apocryphal is that Indonesia has millions of illegal Chinese workers. Difficult to validate, as of course there are millions of perfectly legal Chinese Indonesian workers. But nobody asks why millions of Chinese would come to Indonesia to work illegally when wage levels are less than half those in China. Lacking any objective information to challenge such insultingly inaccurate perceptions, such comments are not only believed by the Indonesians, but when I proffer the truth, I am dismissed as a stupid bully who could not possibly know more than national heroes. Indonesians would castigate me for factual inaccuracies, as recent years have seen a minor net increase in foreign workers, palling into insignificance years of reduction, but reflecting Chinese and Japanese infrastructure investment in Indonesia and the necessary employment of their nationals overseeing their investment. Maybe herein lies an element of truth in the claim, as there could be a number of Chinese professionals and managers working on projects with Chinese investors. 10 billion since 2014, and after writing this, the Chinese were offered a further 13.2 billion in investment opportunities. The current immigration could make it hard for them to get work permits. Although 3,000 Chinese are in Indonesia on work permits, and overall just 0.06% of Indonesia's workforce is from overseas, a staggeringly low figure. Indeed, this is in complete contrast to the economic powerhouse that is Singapore. But then such contradictions in the law are perfectly legal loopholes, or depending on your perception, perfectly illegal loopholes. Nevertheless, insultingly inaccurate claims are the prerogative of politicians the world over. Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. François-Marie Arouet, Voltaire, widely used as propaganda from his letters. What Jan said next was so illuminating, and that he too experienced hatred. Here he was, totally Indonesian to the outside world, but to Indonesians his upbringing in Amsterdam marked him out as a minority to persecute. Whilst our poisoning is undoubtedly extreme, it is the little things that tell me that we are no longer welcome in Indonesia, especially Jakarta. Now at least once a week somebody pushes in front of me in queues. Not unheard of in the West, and endemic in Hanoi, but unheard of in Indonesia just 10 years ago, except by visitors from Singapore and occasional Chinese Indonesian. It also the looks one now gets. The welcoming smile of 5 years ago has been replaced by one masking utter contempt. Hatred because I have a well-paid job, a big house, and I'm Christian, none of which are true. Hatred because I have a beautiful Indonesian wife, which is true, but not one which any Indonesian man would marry in her current health. You see, when the last bulle switches off the lights, Indonesians will turn on themselves. Such is the latent hatred that exists and is being fashioned within their country. I think both Jan and I realise that without our liberalism and acceptance of Indonesian culture has made us immediately accepted in Indonesia. But now to become truly accepted, we must abandon it and fill our hearts with mistrust and hatred for people who are in any other way different. Inexcusable and inexplicable as Islam teaches us that all people are equal and that race and nationality are immaterial. O mankind, we created you from a single pair of male and female, and made you into nations and tribes, that ye may know each other. Verily, the most honoured of you in the sight of God is he who is the most righteous of you, and God has full knowledge and is well acquainted with all things. Al-Quran 49:13. In our front room in South Jakarta, we have a wonderful batik painting of Nyai Roro Kidul's carriage, given to Maddie by an old man at the Kraton. We had no idea that it was Nyai Roro Kidul's carriage until Pa Anggabaya pointed it out to us, admiring the painting, which evoked Jogja to us, but we'd thought little more of it. Pa Anggabaya even gave Maddie some oil to put on it, but she never did. It has always been in our front room, as Maddie promised, to always have it on show when she accepted it. Unknown to me, Maddie had been told at the time that this old man was the Kraton's Dukan, and he had made many predictions to Maddie. But because he spoke in Kraton High Javanese, Widiati had not understood anything. But whilst I was away, during one of her ruqyahs, Maddie became sure that the painting contained some kind of spell, and this was partially responsible for Maddie becoming Nyai Roro Kidul. So maybe my feelings weren't completely unfounded. There is a tradition in Indonesia, although actually amongst the people of Banjarmasin, Kalimantan, but possibly of Javanese origin, of mixing human blood in paintings, especially on the eyes of characters like Semel Messen, who are said to come alive, especially if the blood was taken from somebody who died a violent death. Maybe this explains our painting and its powers. Maddie asked me to burn the painting in the yard, but first it was too large for a single person to take off from the wall, and secondly, I know that burning it in our yard would leave the spells in the ashes and on our property. No, it needed burning somewhere else where. But in a crowded city where burning rubbish is illegal. Weedy was reluctant to help us, as she had found a painting to be by a famous Abdi Dalam and worth a lot of money. Nevertheless, I removed the painting when I was able to and covered it in plastic to decide its fate a little later. Well, that concludes this chapter from the Magic Sugar of Java. I do hope you liked it. I'm going to attempt to add another chapter every week. In order for you to be notified about it, please subscribe and hit the bell. In fact, I need subscribers and listeners to reach monetisation. And I do want feedback, but I also want to stay true to my experiences. I really want to keep things real. So therefore, I don't want to alter the format too much. But above all, thank you for listening. Thank you so much.